Barking Up the Wrong Tree, by Eric Barker. Introduction. 2 men have died trying to do this. It's called the Race Across America, and it is, without a doubt, the single toughest endurance event in the world. Imagine cycling from San Diego to Atlantic City. 3,000 miles. In under 12 days. Now, you might think, oh, that's like the Tour de France. It's not. The Tour has stages. It has breaks. The Race Across America does not stop. Every single minute a rider spends sleeping, resting, or doing anything other than pedaling is a minute their competitor is using to beat them. Riders average a reluctant 3 hours of sleep per night. The exhaustion, the pain, the sleep deprivation, it all just compounds, day after day, as they pedal across the entire United States. But in 2009, none of this seemed to affect the man in first place. His name was Jerry Roby, and he was literally half a day ahead of the next rider. He was a 5-time champion, more than anyone else in history. He seemed unbeatable. So what was his secret? What made this man so dominant in such a grueling event? Was he a genetic marvel? No. Tests showed he was physically typical for a top endurance athlete. Did he have the best coach? No. His trainer called him completely uncoachable. The real secret? The edge that made Jerry Roby the greatest rider in the history of the race was his insanity. And I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean it literally. When Jerry Roby rode his bike for days on end, he would utterly lose his mind. He'd become paranoid. He'd have emotional breakdowns. He'd hallucinate, once seeing Mujahideen soldiers chasing him with guns. He would leap off his bike in the middle of a race to get into fistfights with mailboxes. His own support team had to lock themselves in their car because he would try to attack them. His high school guidance counselor never told him that mailbox assaults and generalized insanity were the keys to success. We're told to do our homework, play by the rules, and be nice. And yet, here was a man achieving the impossible not in spite of his flaws, but because of them. And that raises a serious question, a question that sits at the very heart of the book we're exploring today. What really produces success? Today, we're diving into Eric Barker's phenomenal book, Barking Up the Wrong Tree, the surprising science behind why everything you know about success is mostly wrong. This isn't just another self-help book filled with cliches. For years, Barker has been digging into the research, talking to experts, and finding the often shocking, counterintuitive truths about what separates the extremely successful from the rest of us. By the end of our time together, I promise you this, you will look at your own strengths, your weaknesses, and your entire path to success in a completely new light. You'll learn why the kids who get straight A's rarely become millionaires, what pirates can teach us about being a good person, and why sometimes the best move you can make is to quit. So, let's begin our journey and start barking up the wrong tree. Or perhaps, for the very first time, the right one. Book summary. We all grow up with a certain script for success, don't we? It's whispered to us by parents, taught to us by teachers, and shouted at us by society. Study hard. Get good grades. Follow the rules. Be a team player. The path is clear. Be the best student, the most reliable employee, the person everyone can count on. Be the valedictorian. And it seems like sound advice. After all, what could be a better predictor of future success than being at the top of your high school class? Well, a researcher at Boston College named Karen Arnold decided to find out. She followed 81 high school valedictorians and salutatorians for years after they graduated. And what she found was interesting. By all conventional measures, they did very well. They were reliable, consistent, and well-adjusted. Most went on to have solid, professional careers. They led good lives. But how many of these #1 performers went on to change the world, to run the world, to truly impress the world? The answer was 0. Not one. As Arnold herself put it, Valedictorians aren't likely to be the future's visionaries. They typically settle into the system instead of shaking it up. So why is it that the number ones in school are so rarely the number ones in life? Eric Barker points to two main reasons. First, school rewards students who consistently do what they are told. Getting good grades isn't just about being smart, it's an excellent predictor of self-discipline and the ability to comply with rules. In short, schools reward conformity. Many of the valedictorians even admitted they weren't the smartest kids in class, just the hardest workers, the ones best at giving teachers what they wanted. The second reason is that school rewards being a generalist. To be a valedictorian, you can't just be brilliant at math. You have to stop working on math to make sure you get an A in history too. You have to be good at everything. The real world, however, does the exact opposite. The real world rewards passion and expertise. It rewards the person who becomes so obsessed with one thing that they become the best in the world at it. Following the rules doesn't create world-changing success. It just eliminates the extremes, both the bad and the good. It's like putting a governor on your car's engine. You're far less likely to get into a crash, but you're never going to set any land speed records either. So, if the people who play by the rules don't end up at the very top, who does? To answer that, let's travel back to the 1930s and look at a man whose career was, for all intents and purposes, over. His name was Winston Churchill. Today, we see him as a towering figure of history, but his contemporaries saw him as a brilliant, but paranoid, loose cannon. He was impossible to deal with. He was the Chicken Little of Great Britain, constantly railing against any possible threat to the empire, whether it was real or imagined. He wasn't someone who did everything right. Compare him to the Prime Minister at the time, Neville Chamberlain. Chamberlain was the classic rule follower. He was what Harvard professor Gautam Mukunda would call a filtered leader. A filtered leader is someone who rises up through the traditional system. They're vetted, they play by the rules, they meet expectations. They're reliable, but they're also predictable. They won't rock the boat. Churchill, on the other hand, was an unfiltered leader. He hadn't been polished and sanded down by the system. He came in through the window, not the front door. And because of that, he was unpredictable. And then, a threat emerged that no one in the filtered system was prepared for: Adolf Hitler. Chamberlain and the establishment believed in appeasement. They thought Hitler was a man who could be reasoned with. But Churchill's paranoia, the very bad quality that had nearly ruined his career, was exactly what Britain needed. He was the only one who saw Hitler for the menace he truly was. He knew you didn't give the schoolyard bully your lunch money. You had to sock him in the nose. When the old ways fail, you don't need a better version of the old leader. You need someone entirely different. You need someone the system would have never let in the door. This brings us to a fascinating concept that Barker introduces from Professor Mukunda's work, called intensifiers. An intensifier is a quality that, on average, might be negative. But in certain specific situations, it becomes an overwhelming strength. It's a poison that, under just the right circumstances, can act as a performance-enhancing drug. Jury Roby's insanity was an intensifier. It would be terrible in an office job, but in a 3,000-mile, non-stop bike race, it allowed him to push his body past limits that sane people could never breach. Churchill's paranoia was an intensifier. In peacetime, it made him seem like an extremist. But on the brink of World War II, it made him a prophet. And this leads to a profound idea: our biggest weaknesses might actually be our greatest strengths, if we find the right place for them. Consider the strange case of Ashlyn Blocker. Ashlyn is a teenage girl who has never, ever felt pain. A rare genetic condition means that pain signals simply don't reach her brain. It sounds like a superpower, doesn't it? A life free from headaches, injuries, and dentists. But it's actually an extremely dangerous condition. Pain is our body's warning system. People with this disorder often die in childhood. They can break a bone and not realize it for days. Appendicitis can be a silent killer. And yet, we can see the upside, can't we? The ability to ignore limitations, to push through what holds others back. This is the nature of intensifiers. They represent the extremes of the bell curve. They create both handicaps and superpowers. And this is where we get the idea of orchids and dandelions. Most kids, the old Swedish expression goes, are dandelions. They're resilient. They can thrive pretty much anywhere, under any conditions. But a few kids are orchids. They're fragile. In a harsh environment, they wilt and die. But in the right environment, with the right care, the right support, they bloom into something more beautiful than any dandelion could ever be. Modern genetics is discovering that this isn't just a quaint metaphor. Certain genes that were once labeled bad, genes associated with ADHD, alcoholism, or violence, are turning out to be more like orchid genes. In a negative environment, they can lead to terrible outcomes. But in a positive, nurturing environment, the very same genes can lead to people who are kinder, more creative, and more successful than average. The gene isn't good or bad. The context is what makes the difference. It's all about finding the right pond for your particular set of skills. Think about Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian of all time. Is he physically perfect? Far from it. He's awkward on land. His body proportions are strange. His torso is too long, his legs too short, his arms freakishly long for his height. He's not built to walk. He's built to swim. He is, in a way, what scientists call a hopeful monster, a radical deviation from the norm that, in the right environment, becomes a massive advantage. We spend so much time trying to be good, when good is often just another word for average. We try to sand down our rough edges, to hide the things that make us different, the very things we might have been teased for in school. But as Eric Barker shows us, to be great, you must be different. The thing that sets you apart may be the very thing that gives you an unbeatable advantage. It's not about changing who you are. It's about finding where who you are is a strength. It's about alignment. And this isn't just for athletes or world leaders. In 2000, the creative studio Pixar was worried it was losing its edge. They'd hit after hit, but they feared they were becoming complacent. So they hired a director named Brad Bird and gave him a mission: shake things up. What was his strategy? He said, "Give me the black sheep. I want artists who are frustrated. I want the ones who have another way of doing things that nobody's listening to. Give us all the guys who are probably headed out the door." He asked for the unfiltered artists, the crazy ones. The result? A film called The Incredibles. It grossed over $600 million and won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. The very traits that make people a nightmare in a normal filtered system can also make them the people who change the world. So, the first step to a successful life isn't to follow the rules. It's to understand your own. It's to know yourself. Are you a filtered leader, someone who thrives by mastering the system? Or are you an unfiltered leader, an outlier, an orchid, whose greatest strengths are also your biggest quirks? Once you know that, the next step, as Professor Mukunda advises, is to pick the right pond. Find the environment, the company, the situation that values what you do. Because success isn't about being perfect. It's about being perfectly aligned with your context. An ugly duckling can become a swan, if it just finds the right pond. Alright, so you found your pond. You understand your unique strengths. But success isn't a solo journey. You have to deal with other people. And this brings us to one of the oldest questions in the world: do nice guys finish last? Our culture sends us mixed messages. On one hand, we're told to be kind, cooperative, and trustworthy. On the other hand, we see selfish, ruthless people getting ahead all the time. So what does the science say? Do we need to cut corners, and maybe a few throats, to get to the top? Let's start with the bad news. In the short term, being bad can be very, very good. Stanford professor Jeffrey Pfeffer's research is blunt. Managing what your boss thinks of you is far more important than your actual hard work. A study showed that people who were good at managing impressions got better performance reviews than people who actually worked harder. This often comes down to good old-fashioned flattery. And research has shown that flattery is so powerful, it works even when the boss knows it's insincere. Jerks seem to do well too. Men who are low in the personality trait agreeableness make as much as $10,000 more per year. Rude people even have better credit scores. It seems we're wired to mistake kindness for weakness. In fact, a Harvard study called Brilliant but Cruel shows we often assume that warmth and competence are inversely related. If someone is too nice, we figure they must be a little less competent. But hold on. Before you decide to become a full-time Machiavellian villain, let's consider the long-term consequences. What happens when everyone starts acting like that? You get Moldova. Ruud Vinhoven, the godfather of happiness research, maintains the World Database of Happiness. And when he crunched the numbers, one country came up dead last: Moldova. The reason? The people simply do not trust one another. This lack of trust has reached such epic proportions that it stifles cooperation in almost every area of life. The national attitude can be summed up in 3 words: not my problem. Bad behavior, it turns out, is infectious. When we see others cheating and getting away with it, we start to see it as acceptable. Nobody wants to be the sucker who plays by the rules when no one else does. You might win a few battles by being selfish, but in the long run, as one researcher put it, you destroy the very environment you need for your own success. You create a culture of predators, and eventually, the good people leave. Ironically, to see how essential trust and cooperation are, you need to look at criminals. We think of gang members as lawless psychopaths, but they know more about trust than we give them credit for. In prison, you can't call the cops if someone steals your heroin. The stakes of trustworthiness are much, much higher. To survive, let alone succeed, you need order. You need rules. And that means you need trust. Even pirates, the rebels of the high seas, understood this. We have this image of them as bloodthirsty savages, but that was mostly just marketing. It's much easier to get people to surrender if they're terrified of you. In reality, pirate ships were surprisingly democratic and orderly. Captains could be voted out for any reason. Everyone got a nearly equal share of the loot. They even had a disability plan for injuries sustained in battle. Why? Not because they were morally enlightened, but because it was good business. It created a system built on trust and cooperation, which was far more effective than the tyrannical merchant ships they were rebelling against. They treated their people well, and because of that, they were one of the most successful criminal organizations in history. So, being selfish doesn't work in the long run, even for criminals. But what about the truly good people, the givers? What happens to them? Wharton professor Adam Grant decided to study this. He looked at success metrics across different fields: engineering, medicine, sales, and he looked at 3 types of people: takers, who always try to get more than they give; matchers, who try to keep an even balance; and givers, who help others without expecting anything in return. When Grant looked at who was at the bottom of the success ladder, he found a lot of givers. They were so busy helping everyone else that they missed their own deadlines, got lower grades, and made fewer sales. They became martyrs, exploited by the takers. It's a sad story. But Grant didn't stop there. He then looked at who was at the very top. And he was shocked to discover it was the givers again. Givers are overrepresented at both the bottom and the top of every success metric. The takers and matchers? They mostly end up in the middle. How does this make sense? We've all known the giver who becomes a doormat. But we've also all known the giver who everyone loves, who everyone wants to help, whose reputation for kindness and generosity opens doors for them everywhere they go. The difference between the successful givers and the unsuccessful ones isn't random. The givers at the bottom are purely selfless. They give and give until they burn out. The givers at the top are what you might call smart givers. They are generous, but they also have boundaries. They don't let takers exploit them. They're not just selfless, they have their own ambitions too. So, how do you navigate this complex social world? How do you get ahead without being a jerk, but also without being a sucker? The answer comes from a computer tournament organized by a political scientist named Robert Axelrod. He wanted to find the most effective strategy for cooperation, so he invited experts to submit computer programs to play a game called the Prisoner's Dilemma over and over again. Some programs were always nice. Some were always nasty. Some were complex and tried to outsmart their opponents. But the program that won, and won again in a second, larger tournament, was the simplest of all. It was just 2 lines of code, and its strategy is something we're all familiar with: tit for tat. Tit for tat strategy was this. 1. Cooperate on the very first move. 2. After that, just do whatever your opponent did on the previous move. It was nice. It started with goodwill. It was retaliatory. If you betrayed it, it would betray you right back. And it was forgiving. As soon as you started cooperating again, it would immediately forgive you and cooperate too. It wasn't a sucker, but it was always willing to give others a chance to be good. Axelrod's research offers us 4 clear lessons for life. First, don't be envious. Life isn't always a zero-sum game. Tit for tat never won a single game against an opponent. It either tied or lost slightly. But by eliciting cooperation from others, it racked up the highest total score in the long run. Don't worry about beating the other person. Worry about creating a situation where you both can do well. Second, don't be the first to defect. Always start with trust and cooperation. This is what givers do, and it's why they can build such powerful networks. Third, reciprocate both cooperation and defection. Be a nice person, but don't be a doormat. When someone treats you well, treat them well. When someone treats you poorly, let them know it's not acceptable. And fourth, don't be too clever. The simple, clear strategy of tit for tat beat all the complex, tricky algorithms. People need to understand how you operate. If they see a clear cause and effect, when I'm good to this person, they're good to me, they're more likely to cooperate. In the end, the path to success isn't about being a ruthless taker or a selfless martyr. It's about being a smart giver. It's about playing the long game, building a reputation for being trustworthy and cooperative, but also having the strength to stand up for yourself. It's about creating a world around you that isn't Moldova, but one where trust allows everyone to thrive. We've talked about breaking the rules and we've talked about playing well with others. But what about those moments when things get incredibly hard, when you're facing setback after setback, and everything inside you is screaming to just give up? The old saying is, quitters never win, and winners never quit. But is that really true? We all know someone who wasted years on a project that was never going to work. And we've all quit something too early and regretted it. So what's the right answer? Grit or quit? To understand grit, let's look at the people who may be the grittiest on the planet, the Navy SEALs. Getting through BUD/S, the SEALs training program, is one of the most mentally and physically grueling experiences imaginable. A full 94% of one class failed to make it through. So what separates the few who succeed from the many who ring the bell and quit? Surprisingly, it's not just physical strength. After 9/11, the Navy needed more SEALs and studied this question intensely. What they found was that a huge part of grit comes from the stories we tell ourselves. One of the key mental tools they now teach candidates is positive self-talk. Yes, Navy SEALs, the toughest of the tough, are taught to think like the little engine that could. In our heads, we're saying between 300 and 1,000 words to ourselves every minute. When those words are positive, I can do this, just a little further, it has a huge effect on our ability to keep going. When they started teaching these mental tools, the passing rate for BUD/S training increased by nearly 10%. This power of self-talk is rooted in the work of psychologist Martin Seligman, who studied a phenomenon he called learned helplessness. In his famous experiments, dogs that were subjected to random, unavoidable shocks eventually just gave up. Even when a clear escape route was provided, they just lay there and whimpered. They had learned that nothing they did mattered. They had become pessimistic. Humans often react the same way. When we believe a situation is hopeless, it becomes irrational to keep trying. Pessimism kills grit. Optimism, on the other hand, is the fuel for it. Optimists tell themselves different stories about setbacks. Seligman identified what he called our explanatory style, which comes down to 3 P's: permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization. When something bad happens, a pessimist tells themselves it's permanent, this is never going to change, pervasive, my whole life is ruined, and personal, it's all my fault. An optimist tells a different story. They see bad events as temporary. This is just a rough patch, specific, this one project failed, but it doesn't affect anything else, and external, the circumstances were tough, it wasn't just me. The amazing thing is, this isn't genetic. You can learn to be more optimistic by consciously changing the stories you tell yourself. But sometimes, grit comes from something even deeper than optimism. It comes from meaning. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the horrors of Auschwitz, observed who survived the concentration camps and who didn't. It wasn't the physically strongest, or the youngest, or the bravest. The people who kept going, he realized, were the ones who had a reason to live, a meaning that was greater than their suffering. He who has a why to live for, Frankl wrote, quoting Nietzsche, can bear almost any how. When we live for something greater than ourselves, our family, a cause, an unfinished work, we no longer have to fight the pain. We accept it as a necessary sacrifice. The stories we tell ourselves about why we are enduring the hardship become stronger than the hardship itself. So grit comes from our stories, whether they're optimistic self-talk or a deep sense of meaning. But there's another, stranger source of grit: games. Think of Joe Simpson, the mountain climber who fell into a crevasse in the Peruvian Andes, shattering his leg. His partner, assuming he was dead, cut the rope. He was alone, severely injured, miles from base camp, with no food and little water. By any rational measure, his situation was hopeless. So how did he survive? He turned it into a game. He started setting small, arbitrary goals. Can I make it to that glacier in 20 minutes? If he made it, he felt a rush of victory. If he failed, it just made him more determined to win the next round. This simple game, this shift in perspective, kept him going through unimaginable pain and brought him back to safety. Good games have 4 things in common, which you can remember with the acronym WNGF. Whiny neutered goats fly. They are winnable. They have clear rules and you know it's possible to succeed, which breeds optimism. They have novel challenges. Good games are always presenting something new, keeping us engaged and in a state of flow. They have clear goals. You always know what you're supposed to be doing. And they provide constant feedback. You always know how you're doing, and even small wins are celebrated, which is incredibly motivating. Most of our jobs, sadly, are terrible games. The rules are unclear, the challenges are monotonous, the goals aren't our own, and feedback comes once a year in a performance review. But like Joe Simpson, you can superimpose your own game onto your life. You can define your own winnable goals, seek out novel challenges, and create your own feedback loops to track your progress. So, grit is powerful. But what about the other side of the coin? What about quitting? W.C. Fields once said, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Then quit. No use being a damn fool about it. This is where we meet Spencer Glendon. Spencer is a brilliant guy with a PhD in economics from Harvard. He's also been extremely ill for almost his entire life. His chronic illness meant he had a very limited amount of energy each day. He simply couldn't do everything. And he calls this the good fortune to be physically compromised. Why? Because it forced him to learn a lesson most of us ignore: opportunity cost. Everything we do in life is a trade-off. Choosing to do one thing means choosing not to do something else. Because his energy was so limited, he had to be ruthless about quitting things that didn't matter so he could focus his precious energy on the one thing that did. We all have limits, but we act like we don't. We try to do everything, and as a result, we often do nothing well. Strategic quitting isn't the opposite of grit. It's the necessary partner to it. You quit the things that aren't working so you can free up time and energy to be gritty about the things that are. But what if you don't know what to be gritty about yet? This is where another form of quitting comes in: experimentation. Think of the comedian Chris Rock. When he's developing a new hour-long special, he doesn't just write it and perform it. He goes to small comedy clubs, night after night, with a yellow notepad, and just tries stuff. Most of the jokes fail miserably. He notes what works, and he quits what doesn't. He's running hundreds of little experiments. He needs to fail in order to find what's worth keeping. As Peter Sims writes in his book Little Bets, most successful entrepreneurs don't begin with brilliant ideas, they discover them. They try things to discover what they should do. This is the fail fast, fail cheap model. So we have a paradox. We need grit to stick with things, but we need to quit to find the right things to stick with. How do we resolve this? The answer comes from a simple but powerful tool developed by psychologist Gabriella Tongin. It's called WOOP. W stands for wish. What is it you really want? Let yourself dream. O stands for outcome. What is the best possible result if you achieve your wish? O stands for obstacle. Now, get real. What is the main thing inside of you that's holding you back? P stands for plan. What is an effective action you can take to overcome that obstacle? Create an if-then plan. If obstacle happens, then I will action. The magic of WOOP is twofold. First, it forces you to move beyond mere fantasy and create an actual plan. But second, it acts as a personal litmus test. Ottenjohn's research found that when your wish is achievable, going through the WOOP process gives you a motivational boost. But when your wish is unrealistic, you actually feel less energized. Your non-conscious mind tells you, this isn't going to work. WOOP tells you when to apply grit and when it's time to quit. It helps you decide which battles are worth fighting. So when you're faced with that age-old question, should I stay or should I go? You now have a tool to find the answer. So, you've learned to be an outlier. You've learned to be a smart giver. You've learned when to have grit and when to quit. But all of this relies on a certain attitude, a certain belief in yourself. We're told constantly that the key to success is confidence. Believe in yourself, and you can achieve anything. But is that always true, or is confidence a double-edged sword? Let's look at one of the most famous showdowns in history. Chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov versus the IBM supercomputer, Deep Blue. In 1997, Kasparov, the most dominant player in the world, sat down for a rematch against the machine he had beaten the year before. He was, to put it mildly, confident. But during the first game, Deep Blue made a move that made no sense to him. It was a strange, seemingly pointless move. Kasparov couldn't figure it out. Could it be a mistake? Or could the machine be seeing something he couldn't? What if it was thinking 20 moves ahead, on a level of genius he couldn't comprehend? That one move shook him. He ended up winning that game anyway, but his confidence was rattled. In the second game, Deep Blue made another strange move. This time, Kasparov, believing he was being outsmarted by a superior intellect, resigned from a position that was actually a draw. He lost his confidence, and it became his undoing. He went on to lose the entire match. Here's the truth about that first mysterious move: it was a bug in the software. The computer had glitched, and its failsafe was to make a completely random move. Kasparov didn't see a random move. He projected genius onto it. He saw the machine's move as a sign of supreme confidence, and it destroyed his own. Sometimes, the mere appearance of confidence can be the difference between winning and losing. And the research backs this up. Successful people are confident. In fact, they are consistently overconfident. They overrate their performance relative to their peers. This self-deception can be a good thing. It makes you more optimistic, more likely to take on challenges, and more productive. It can even make you a leader. Research shows that just by speaking first and speaking often, very confident behaviors, people are perceived as leaders, even if they don't know what they're talking about. But as we saw with Kasparov, there's a dark side. Confidence can slide into hubris, and hubris can lead to delusion. Consider the strange world of no-touch knockouts in martial arts. Masters like Yanagi Rukin claim to be able to knock out opponents using their chi energy, without ever touching them. And in videos with his students, it seemed to work. They would run at him, and with a flick of his wrist, they would fall to the ground. He was so confident that he accepted a challenge from a real mixed martial arts fighter for a $5,000 prize. And what happened? He got his butt kicked. His magic powers had no effect on someone who didn't believe in them. His students fell down because they wanted to believe. And their compliance, year after year, fueled his delusion. This is the danger of overconfidence. When you surround yourself with people who tell you you're a genius, you can end up believing you have superpowers that don't exist in the real world. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect. The people with the least competence are often the most confident, because they don't have enough knowledge to even know what they don't know. Even worse, the feeling of power that comes with confidence can turn you into a jerk. Study after study shows that power reduces empathy, makes us hypocritical, and causes us to ignore advice, even from experts. So if overconfidence is dangerous, what's the alternative? A lack of confidence? That doesn't sound very inspiring. Being unsure all the time makes you less likely to take risks and can signal incompetence to others. It seems like we're trapped. Impress people but become a delusional jerk, or be a humble learner who no one takes seriously. But what if, as Barker suggests, we throw out the entire confidence paradigm? University of Texas professor Kristen Neff proposes an alternative: self-compassion. Self-esteem is about judging yourself. Am I good? Am I worthy? It's conditional. You only feel good about yourself when you succeed. And to maintain it, you often have to delude yourself or become arrogant. Self-compassion, on the other hand, is not about judgment. It's about treating yourself with kindness, especially when you fail. It's accepting that you are a fallible human being, and that's okay. Research shows that self-compassion gives you all the benefits of self-esteem, like happiness and personal initiative, but with none of the downsides. People with self-compassion see the world more accurately because they're not afraid of negative feedback. They take more responsibility for their mistakes because they don't beat themselves up over them. They have less fear of failure, which means they have more grit and procrastinate less. Self-compassion is about forgiving yourself, not just believing in yourself. And that allows you to walk the tightrope between confidence and delusion. You can have the drive to achieve great things without losing your connection to reality or to other people. It allows you to be ambitious, but also to be a learner. It allows you to be strong, but also to be kind, most importantly, to yourself. So here we are. We have a set of powerful, often counterintuitive tools. We know to embrace our inner outlier, to be a smart giver, to balance grit with strategic quitting, and to choose self-compassion over fragile self-esteem. But how do we put it all together? How do we balance the relentless drive for achievement with the need for a happy, well-rounded life? This is the final and perhaps most important question. What about work-life balance? Let's look at two titans: Ted Williams, one of the greatest baseball hitters of all time, and Albert Einstein, the architect of modern physics. Both reached the absolute pinnacle of success in their fields. And both did it through an obsessive, monomaniacal focus on their work. Ted Williams lived for his next time at bat. He practiced until his hands bled. He chose school courses with less homework so he'd have more time for hitting. It was baseball first, fishing second, and his wife a distant third. Einstein lived in a world of ideas. His work upended our understanding of the universe. But this focus came at a cost. He treated his wife like an employee he couldn't fire. He became estranged from his children, one of whom said, "Probably the only project he ever gave up on was me." Howard Gardner, who studied the lives of eminent creators, found that they all made a kind of Faustian bargain. They sacrificed the possibility of a rounded personal existence for the sake of their work. And if you're in a job you're not passionate about, the long hours are even more destructive. In Japan, they have a word for death from overwork: shi. It's not a rare phenomenon, it's a recognized public health crisis. This is where we have to get brutally honest. The modern world is a symbiote, just like the alien costume Spider-Man found. It latches onto you. It offers you power, the ability to be connected, to be working, 24/7. But it drains you. It blurs the lines. You are always faced with a choice. Should I answer this email, or should I play with my kid? 30 years ago, that wasn't a decision. Now, it's a constant source of stress. The world will no longer draw a line for you. It will always tell you to do more, be more, achieve more. If you don't define your own finish line, you will run forever. So what's the solution? You need a personal definition of success. The authors of the book Just Enough surveyed high achievers and found that a successful life can't be measured by a single yardstick, like money or promotions. They identified 4 key metrics that we all need. 1. Happiness, feelings of pleasure and enjoyment. 2. Achievement, winning and accomplishing your goals. 3. Significance, having a positive impact on people you care about. 4. Legacy, helping others find future success through your values and accomplishments. You can't just focus on one and sequence the others. I'll work like a dog now and focus on my family later. Relationships don't work that way. They need consistent investment. The key is to define what good enough looks like for you in each of these 4 areas. This isn't about being mediocre. It's about being a chooser instead of a picker. A picker just selects from the options in front of them. A chooser decides what they truly want and creates a life that reflects that. And to do this, you need a plan. Like Genghis Khan, who transformed a chaotic mess of feuding tribes into the largest empire in history, you need to step outside the reactive cycle. You need to decide what you want, and then design your life around it. This starts with a simple but profound first step: track your time. For 1 week, write down where every hour goes. Then, label each activity with which of the 4 metrics it serves: happiness, achievement, significance, or legacy. This will be a sobering experience. But you cannot balance your time if you don't know where it's going. Second, schedule everything. To-do lists are evil because they don't account for time. A calendar does. Decide when you want your workday to end, and then work backward, scheduling your most important tasks first. And make sure to schedule an hour of protected time every day for deep work, the work that really moves the needle, not just the shallow work of answering emails. And third, control your context. Make the things you should do easier, and the things you shouldn't do harder. Put the junk food in a container. Turn off your phone notifications. Hide in a conference room to get deep work done. In today's world, work-life balance is a myth. There is no perfect, static balance. There is only a dynamic, messy, and deeply personal process of alignment. Alignment between who you are and the pond you choose to swim in. Alignment between your definition of success and the plan you create to live it. And most importantly, alignment with the people you love. Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through barking up the wrong tree, what is the one single idea that ties all these surprising, strange, and wonderful stories together? It's one word: Alignment. Success isn't about having one single quality. It's not about being the smartest, or the nicest, or the most confident. It's about the alignment between who you are and where you choose to be. It's Jury Roby's insanity aligned with a grueling bike race. It's Winston Churchill's paranoia aligned with the threat of Nazi Germany. It's Michael Phelps's strange body aligned with a swimming pool. It's the giver finding a community of other givers. It's the introvert finding the quiet space to achieve mastery. The world spends so much time telling you what to be. This book does something far more valuable. It gives you permission to be who you are, and then it gives you a map to find where that person can thrive. The old script is broken. The one-size-fits-all path to success is a myth. In a world of infinite choices and impossible standards, the only way to win is to play your own game. And that starts with knowing yourself, with an almost scientific curiosity. What are your intensifiers? What are the quirks and oddities that you've tried to hide, but that might actually be your superpowers in disguise? And then, it requires the courage to build a life around that truth. To choose your pond, to create your plan, to define what good enough means for you, independent of what the world is screaming at you. Perhaps the most powerful alignment of all is with other people. Over and over again, the research points to the same conclusion. The greatest predictor of long-term success and happiness is not your IQ, your salary, or your job title. It's the strength of your relationships. George Vaillant, who led the legendary Grant study that followed men for their entire lives, summed up decades of research with one simple sentence: the only thing that really matters in life are your relationships to other people. The final story in this book is about a man named Martin Pistorius. For 12 years, he was locked in, fully conscious but unable to move or communicate, trapped inside his own body. Everyone thought he was brain dead. He heard his own mother, in a moment of despair, say, "I hope you die." He was powerless, alone, and without hope. But slowly, miraculously, he began to regain some control. He learned to communicate through a computer. And he didn't just come back to life, he started chasing the dreams he had held on to in his darkest hours. He got a job. He started his own company. He went to college. He learned to drive. And he got married. His story is an extreme example, but it's a powerful reminder. We all feel locked in at times, trapped by our circumstances, our limitations, our fears. But success is not about the absence of limitations. It's about what we do in spite of them. It's about dreaming, and then, as Martin did, doing something about those dreams. So, here are a few simple actions you can take, starting today, to find your own alignment. First, take 15 minutes and write down your intensifiers. What makes you different? What's a quality you've always seen as a weakness that, in the right context, could be a strength? Knowing yourself is the first step. Second, pick one goal you have and run it through the WHOOP framework. What is your wish? The outcome? The obstacle? And what is your if-then plan? Turn that vague dream into a concrete strategy. And finally, think of one person who has made a difference in your life. A teacher, a mentor, a friend. And send them a message, right now, thanking them. Not just a quick thanks, but a specific thank you for what they did and how it affected you. As this book shows, gratitude isn't just a nice feeling. It's the cornerstone of the relationships that will ultimately define the success of your life. That was a summary of Barking Up the Wrong Tree by Eric Barker. We've explored the core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary is like looking at a travel brochure. The real journey, the real adventure, happens when you visit the destination yourself. The magic of this book is in the details, the stories that stick with you, the studies that make you pause and rethink everything. This summary is your map, but the treasure is in the book itself. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity, I truly encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning new facts, it's an experience that can fundamentally change how you see your own potential. Also, if you found this summary valuable, Please take a moment to subscribe and share it with someone you think it could help. Our goal here is to explore the world's most powerful ideas together, one book at a time. Let's keep learning, and let's keep growing.